Is this some kind of joke? The voice was young, sharp, and dripping with the unearned confidence that only a freshly starched uniform can provide. Corporal Davis, all of 21 years and 6 months, a United States Marine, stood with his hands on his hips, looking down at the old man seated on a simple folding chair. The vast olive-drab canvas of the general-purpose tent muffled the sounds of the base's annual open house, creating an intimate stage for the confrontation. Harold Winters, 89 years old, didn't move. His hands latticed with the roadmap of a long life rested on his knees. He wore simple khaki pants and a faded blue polo shirt, a stark contrast to the crisp desert camouflage worn by the young Marine before him. Harold's gaze was fixed on a point somewhere beyond the canvas wall, a placid look on his face that seemed to infuriate the corporal even more. "Hey, I'm talking to you, old man," Davis pressed, his voice rising. Two other young Marines, his friends, chuckled behind him, their posture mimicking his own brand of casual arrogance. "This area is for active duty personnel and their families. Did you get lost on your way to the bingo hall?" The small crowd admiring vintage rifles and battle maps began shifting their attention. Conversations died as heads turned. A mother pulled her son closer, eyes darting between the aggressive Marine and the frail man. The tense atmosphere grew heavy despite the afternoon heat. Everyone felt the wrongness, yet no one intervened. Davis mistook silence for approval, feeding his righteousness. He puffed his chest, convinced he was performing sacred duty, protecting military space from unauthorized civilians. He saw himself as guardian, keeper of standards, the embodiment of everything the Marine Corps represented. The irony would soon devastate him. "I need identification," Davis announced loudly. "Base regulations. Can't have random people wandering restricted areas." Harold moved with deliberate slowness, reaching for a worn leather wallet. The wallet told stories, edges softened by decades, leather cracked like dry riverbeds. His arthritic fingers fumbled with plastic sleeves, struggling to extract what Davis demanded. "Come on, old-timer," Davis said, dripping impatience. "We haven't got all afternoon. What are you, 100? Just give me your license so we can get you back wherever you came from." The cruelty was unmistakable. Several people exchanged uncomfortable glances. An older gentleman in a Navy cap stepped forward, then stopped, uncertain. Harold finally produced a state ID and extended it with a trembling hand. Davis snatched it forcefully, glancing with barely concealed contempt. "Harold Winters," he read aloud, as if the name were evidence of crime. "Northwood address. This doesn't give you clearance here. This is for military personnel and immediate family only." He held the card between thumb and forefinger as though contaminated, preparing to return it with another lecture, but his eyes caught something else. Pinned to Harold's polo collar was a small metal piece, tarnished and dull, lacking polished brilliance of official insignia. It looked handmade, rough, like something a child fashioned in workshop. "What's that supposed to be?" Davis asked mockingly. He pointed at the pin, finger hovering near Harold's face. "Make that in arts and crafts? Some participation trophy from the senior center?" His friends erupted in harsh laughter. One slapped his knee. The humiliation was suffocating, pressing down like physical weight. People looked away, unable to watch yet unable to intervene. The uniform Davis wore created an invisible barrier none dared cross. For the first time, something shifted in Harold's expression. Not anger, something deeper, like tremors before an earthquake. Davis's mocking face began fading from vision, dissolving like morning fog. The tense, humid interior transformed, air suddenly sharp and cold enough to burn lungs. Harold was no longer 89 in a folding chair. He was 20 again, kneeling in snow-stained red and black, hands wrapped around a machine gun frozen solid. The sky was iron-colored, pressing down on barren Korean hills like a coffin lid. Temperature had plunged to 40 below zero, cold enough that breath froze instantly, coating faces with ice masks. Harold knelt beside Captain Richards, a good officer trying hard not to die from shrapnel that tore through his chest. The captain's breathing came in wet rattles, each weaker than the last. Blood soaked through his uniform, and froze into crimson armor. Around them, battle sounds faded into eerie quiet, broken only by screaming wind and distant artillery thunder. They had held the line 16 hours already, an impossible defensive position that should have collapsed in the first wave. 20-1 odds, and they held. With shaking hands, Richards fumbled at his collar, fingers clumsy in thick gloves. He removed a small pin, something fashioned from twisted antenna blown off their radio during the first enemy barrage. The metal was jagged and rough, but he wore it throughout battle like a talisman. "You held the line, Winters," Richards rasped, pressing cold metal into Harold's palm. His eyes were glazing, focusing beyond the visible world. "You held it when everyone said impossible. You held it alone." He coughed horribly. "This pin, don't let anyone forget what we did here. Don't let them forget what it came." Those were Richards's last words. The pin, worthless scrap to anyone else, became more sacred to Harold than any metal. "Sir, are you okay?" The voice cut through memory like a knife through fabric, pulling Harold across 7 decades instantly. He blinked, Korean hills dissolving back into canvas walls. Standing before him was a man in his late 30s, uniform bearing gunnery sergeant chevrons. His name tape read Reyes, face etched with genuine concern. "Sir, I'm Gunnery Sergeant Reyes. Is this corporal bothering you?" Before Harold could respond, Davis wheeled on the senior NCO, face flushed with indignation. "Gunny, I've got this under control. This civilian is in restricted area without authorization. I'm handling it per base regulations." Reyes didn't glance at him. His eyes remained fixed on Harold, and what he saw made something cold settle in his gut. He had served 2 Iraq tours and 1 Afghanistan. He had seen real combat, the kind leaving permanent soul marks. And he recognized something in this old man's 1,000-yard stare having nothing to do with age or confusion. It was the look of someone who had been to unimaginable places and somehow found their way back. "Corporal Davis," Reyes said, voice dropping to unmistakable authority, "stand down and step away from this gentleman right now." Davis's face went from flushed to nearly purple. "With all due respect, Gunny, this is my situation. I've called for MPs. This man isn't leaving until I get answers about why he's here and what gives him right to wear that." He gestured at the pin. "Whatever that is." Reyes felt his jaw clench. He couldn't physically intervene without creating bigger incident, but every instinct screamed that something catastrophic was forming. He had seen enough junior Marines make career-ending mistakes to recognize one in real time. Without taking eyes off the scene, he stepped back and pulled his cell phone. He turned slightly away, voice low as he dialed the base command center. "This is Gunnery Sergeant Reyes at Fleet Week Historical Display, GP Tent 104. I have a situation. Corporal Davis is harassing an elderly civilian, and it's escalating." He paused, listening. "Yes, I have his identification. The corporal made him show it. The gentleman's name is Harold Winters. That's Whiskey India November Tango Echo Romeo Sierra, first name Harold." He ended the call and slipped off phone back, eyes never leaving Davis, who continued his tirade, unaware that a phone call just sealed his fate. The witness had acted. The gears of military bureaucracy, slow and grinding in most circumstances, could move with terrifying speed when properly motivated. And the name just provided was about to provide all motivation needed. Inside the climate-controlled base command center, Master Sergeant Frank Miller sat reviewing routine paperwork when Reyes's call came through. He listened with patient attention of a career administrator who had handled thousands of minor incidents over 23 years. A corporal harassing a civilian at open house was unfortunate, but hardly unprecedented. Young Marines sometimes got overzealous about security. He would dispatch a patrol to de-escalate, document the incident, ensure the civilian received an apology. Standard procedure. "Spell that name one more time," Miller said, fingers poised over keyboard to enter information into the National Military Personnel Database. "Winters, Whiskey India November Tango Echo Romeo Sierra, first name Harold," Reyes repeated. Miller typed carefully, double-checking spelling before hitting enter. The database was comprehensive, containing service records for virtually every person who wore American military uniforms since World War I. He expected routine entry, maybe short enlistment in the 50s or 60s, nothing complicating the situation. Results loaded onto his screen. Miller stared at them. He read the entry once, brain refusing to process what eyes were seeing. He read it again, more slowly. His pen slipped from nerveless fingers and clattered onto the desk. He stood up with such violence that his rolling chair shot backward and crashed into a metal filing cabinet with a bang echoing through the entire command center. Every head turned toward him. Captain Evans, the officer of the deck, looked up from his workstation with mild irritation. "Everything all right, Master Sergeant?" he asked, tone suggesting this had better be important. Miller couldn't speak. His throat closed up entirely. He simply raised one trembling hand and pointed at his monitor, fingers shaking visibly. Evans sighed and walked over, prepared to deal with whatever technical issue caused such drama. He leaned over Miller's shoulder and looked at the screen. The irritation vanished as if someone flipped a switch. His skin went from normal, healthy color to a shade of gray, matching the computer monitors. Under the name Harold Winters was a service record reading like something from a history book, a list of campaigns and battles spanning 3 separate wars. Iwo Jima, Incheon, Quezon, names every Marine learned in boot camp, names written in blood. And at the very top of the record, in bold letters burning themselves into Evans's retinas, were 3 words changing everything. Medal of Honor. Evans grabbed the phone from Miller's desk with hands shaking badly enough he nearly dropped it. "Gunnery Sergeant Reyes, this is Captain Evans at Command Center. What is your exact location right now?" He didn't wait for full answer. "Listen very carefully, Gunny. Do not, under any circumstances, allow Mr. Winters to leave. The civilian, I mean the elderly gentleman. Your new primary mission is ensuring his safety and comfort. Do you understand me?" He paused, swallowing hard. "The base commandant has been notified and is en route to your location. General Jonathan Pierce is coming to you personally. ETA 5 minutes. He hung up and looked at Miller, both sharing a moment of horrified understanding. Somewhere on their being a corporal who didn't know better had just humiliated a living legend, a man whose name belonged in the same sentence as Chesty Puller and Dan Daly. And they had approximately 5 minutes before the general arrived to witness the aftermath. Back in the GP tent, Corporal Davis had reached what he believed was the logical conclusion of his security enforcement. He stood with hands on hips, looking down at Harold with smug satisfaction. "All right, that's it," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You're being evasive. You're in restricted area without authorization. And frankly, I think you might be confused about where you are." He leaned in slightly, voice taking on exaggerated concern dripping with condescension. "For your own safety and everyone's safety here, I'm detaining you until military police arrive. They can make sure you get help you need, maybe proper evaluation." He reached out his hand, fingers extending toward Harold's thin arm, preparing to physically compel the old man to his feet. At that precise moment, the sound of sirens cut through air outside. But these weren't sirens of a single patrol car responding to minor incident. This was full-throated wail of emergency convoy, multiple vehicles moving at high speed with lights blazing. Tires screeched on asphalt and as vehicles came to abrupt stops just outside tent. Car doors opened and slammed shut in rapid succession, sounds sharp and military precise. Heavy boots hit gravel in synchronized rhythm. The tent flap exploded inward as if struck by hurricane. 2 military police officers entered first, moving with controlled urgency of tactical operators. Their hands rested on holstered sidearms, eyes sweeping the interior with professional efficiency before taking positions on either side of the entrance at rigid attention. The crowd, which had been watching the confrontation with growing horror, now turned as one toward the entrance. Corporal Davis froze, hands still extended in midair, face a mask of confusion morphing into fear. And then General Jonathan Pierce stepped through the opening. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. He was a 2-star general, the base commandant, a man whose face most had only seen in official photographs or during formal ceremonies. His uniform was absolutely immaculate, every crease razor sharp, every ribbon and medal positioned with mathematical precision. But it was his face commanding attention. His expression was carved from granite, cold and furious in equal measure, the face of a man personally insulted and here to exact retribution. He moved with authority that made everyone instinctively straighten posture, even those not in uniform. Davis looked like he might actually faint. General Pierce's eyes swept across the scene with targeting system efficiency. They passed over the frightened crowd, lingered on pale-faced Davis with absolute contempt, and settled on Harold Winters. The old man had begun pushing himself to his feet, moving with careful deliberation of someone whose joints no longer cooperated. The general didn't hesitate. He strode across tent, polished boots making no sound on canvas floor. The crowd parted before him like water before ship's bow. He stopped exactly 3 feet in front of Harold, and in sudden cathedral silence of tent, General Jonathan Pierce's entire body snapped to rigid attention. His right hand came up to his brow in the sharpest, most perfect salute of his 3-decade career, a gesture so full of respect and reverence that it sent shockwaves through every person present. "Sergeant Major Winters," General Pierce's voice rang out, clear and strong, filling every corner with unmistakable pride. "It is an absolute honor to have you on my base, sir." The words hung like a thunderclap. "Sergeant Major, sir," directed at the old man in polo shirt Davis had been mocking moments before. Davis's face went from pale to the color of old ashes. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish drowning in air. The silence was so complete that the generator hum outside sounded like a jet engine. Pierce held his salute, eyes locked on Harold's, waiting with infinite patience for acknowledgement that would allow him to lower his hand. Finally, slowly, Harold lifted his own weathered hand in return salute, the gesture shaky but unmistakable. Only then did Pierce lower his arm. The general turned to address the crowd, voice taking on resonance of a man reciting sacred text. "For those who may not know, you are in the presence of a genuine American hero. Sergeant Major Harold Winters is a veteran of the 1st Marine Division. He served in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam." He let that sink in, watching comprehension dawn on face after face. At the Battle of Chosin Reservoir in December 1950, then Staff Sergeant Winters found his platoon pinned down, their officer mortally wounded, and their flank about to be overrun by enemy forces outnumbering them 20-1. In temperatures of 40 degrees below zero with his primary weapon frozen useless, he single-handedly charged the enemy position. Pierce's voice grew stronger, more intense. Armed with only an entrenching tool and 6 hand grenades, he broke their assault and held that line alone for 17 hours until reinforcements could arrive. His actions that day saved the lives of more than 100 Marines. A woman in the crowd raised her hand to her mouth, tears already forming. An older man wearing a Vietnam veteran's cap slowly rose to his feet, hand moving instinctively to his heart. For his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his own life, above and beyond the call of duty, Pierce concluded, voice thick with emotion, Harold Winters was awarded the Medal of Honor, our nation's highest military decoration. The silence that followed was different from before. It was no longer uncomfortable tension of witnessing injustice. It was profound, reverent quiet of people in the presence of something greater than themselves. Cell phones emerged from pockets, not to record confrontation, but to capture this moment of history. Every veteran in tent, regardless of age or service branch, had gotten to their feet. They weren't just standing, they were bearing witness to something rare and precious, a living connection to sacrifices that purchased their freedoms. Pierce lowered his hand and turned to face Davis. The warmth filling his voice when addressing Harold vanished completely, replaced by Arctic cold. "Corporal Davis," he said, the name emerging like something poisonous. His voice was not loud, it was low and controlled, which somehow made it infinitely more terrifying. "In my 30 years wearing this uniform, I have never been more ashamed than I am at this moment. You wear the same eagle, globe, and anchor that this man bled for, that men like him died for. You stand in a tradition he helped build with his own blood and sacrifice, and you use that uniform to humiliate him. You use the authority it granted you to mock a man to whom every one of us owes a debt that can never be repaid." Davis was shaking visibly now, tears streaming down his face, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "You are a disgrace," Pierce continued, voice like a scalpel. "Gunnery Sergeant Reyes," Reyes snapped to attention. "Yes, General." "Thank you for your integrity and awareness, Gunny. Now escort Corporal Davis and his friends to my office. I will deal with them personally." As Reyes moved to comply, a quiet voice stopped everyone. "General." It was Harold, speaking for the first time. Every eye turned to him. He's just a boy, Harold said, voice gentle but firm, carrying weight of someone who had seen the full measure of human folly and forgiven it anyway. We were all young once, full of fire and not enough wisdom. Maybe the boy doesn't need to be destroyed. Maybe he just needs to be taught. Pierce looked from Harold's compassionate face to Davis's terrified one. He considered the words carefully, then nodded with visible respect. As you wish, Sergeant Major. He will be taught. Davis was not discharged. Following Harold's merciful intervention, Pierce designed different punishment. One focused on education rather than destruction. Davis was reassigned and placed in an intensive remedial program under a retired master gunnery sergeant who had lost a leg in Fallujah. For 3 months, his life became education in humility and history. He spent days reading after-action reports from Tarawa, Peleliu, and Chosin Reservoir. He spent evenings maintaining historical displays at the base museum, carefully cleaning and preserving artifacts of sacrifice. His final requirement was researching and writing detailed personal histories of 3 Medal of Honor recipients, one being Harold Winters. 6 months after that day in the tent, on a quiet afternoon, Harold sat at his usual table in the local VFW hall, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The door opened and a young man in civilian clothes entered, looking uncertain and deeply uncomfortable. It was the former Corporal Davis. He approached Harold's table and stood there, struggling to find words adequate to the moment. "Mr. Winters, sir," he finally managed, voice cracking with genuine emotion. "I came to apologize for what I did. There's no excuse for my behavior. I was arrogant and ignorant, and I am so deeply sorry." Harold looked up at him and saw not the cocky corporal from that day, but a young man humbled and transformed by facing his own failure. He gestured to the empty chair. "Sit down, son," Harold said kindly. "Tell me what you've learned." The incident led to lasting changes. A new mandatory program called the Winters Initiative was established, requiring every Marine from private to colonel to spend regular time with local veterans, listening to their stories and ensuring lessons of sacrifice were never forgotten. The goal was simple: to make certain no one would ever again look at an old man in a polo shirt and fail to see the giant standing before them.